My name is Nick Schiner. I am the program director of peer-to-peer learning community, professional learning communities, and also maker learning here at Digital Promise. It's a lot easier for me to just say that I am a program director on our learning experience design team. I also do a lot of volunteer work as the chief learning officer for the Coalition of Parents in Esports, also known as COPE. So I am a parent, I am a former classroom educator, instructional coach, central office leader, and have been here now at Digital Promise for about 4 years. And you can find me at Obi-Wan Nakobe on basically all socials. It's really great to be here with all of you today.
And I likewise am thrilled to be here with you. I'm Ben Scragg. I'm the Director of Education and Learning at eFuse. We're a technology startup based out of Columbus, Ohio, in esports and gaming space, really trying to create a world where anyone can change their life through gaming. And so we offer a variety of products and services, from league and tournament organizing platforms to streaming and event production to operating collegiate publisher sanctioned collegiate leagues, including College Rocket League, Collegiate Fortnite, and College Call of Duty. And in my role, I'm also kind of supporting and evangelizing kind of the integration of esports into educational and academic spaces. So really thrilled to be here. In my background, I am also a Sun Devil and been connected to the ShapingEDU community for a while, and have a background in K-12 and higher ed faculty and staff roles. So thrilled to be here with you. Happy to be back with the team at ShapingEDU. And just to share a little bit about what we're going to do, we have 45 minutes, but we set this up as it's kind of a workshop, and really want to kind of set up kind of some tension and problematizing, and then creating opportunity as we think about you all being designers for an education system on Mars and where you're going today and tomorrow. Really want to kind of introduce esports and the educational opportunity through the lens of traditional sports, and mapping those to educational context, finding similarities, finding opportunities, and thinking about this idea of the grammar of schooling, a really important kind of academic concept that we'll use to kind of be a foil for some of the work we're going to ask you to jump into with us here in a bit. Nick, what did I miss? Anything else we should share? Or is that nebulous enough to throw it away?
Yeah, you know, the more vague you are, the better, because that means we can't fall short of anybody's expectations. But no, our goal really is to make sure that we are setting you up with the opportunity to really think through esports and how it could contribute to this work that you all are engaged in and will be engaged in through tomorrow, around building that model school on Mars, free of any of the problems that we have here. I love that approach. So we're really excited to be working with all of you today.
Yeah, and just kind of a framing quote that I've carried with me, came across this during my time as a graduate student at ASU. Just speaks to the idea, I won't read the whole thing here, but speaks to the idea that educational systems are products of design, that everything we do in education is not handed down from the heavens, but these are human-made interventions, artifacts, systems, processes. And so they're not necessarily intended to be uniform and lasting, but they're contingent on the context in which we find ourselves, including the context of designing one on Mars. And we're going to leave this as kind of a foundation and put a foil against it when we talk about the stickiness of the grammar of schooling, but just want to use this almost as a jumping off point to really think about the idea that everything we're doing is designed, and as such, then it's fodder for reimagination and redesign.
Okay, so we're going to get started with an activity right away. I don't really like talking at people. I like talking with people. I think I have a small enough group here today that we can actually stay in this full room rather than sending you all out into breakout rooms. But you'll see a link that Stacy has graciously shared in the chat. That is bit.ly/ASU esports. What we're going to be doing today is we're really going to start with a conversation about traditional sports in education. We know traditional sports have been part of the scholastic experience for generations. So we want to start with this as a way to start the conversation around how something that really is not part of the schooling experience has become really something that's been central to the schooling experience and can provide a lot of learning opportunities in school and after school as well. So you can go ahead and navigate to that bit.ly link. This is going to take you to a Miro board. If you've never used Miro before, it's very similar to Padlet, Google Jamboard, any of your interactive whiteboard experiences. What I've done for you here is I've created 4 different groups. Don't get too worried about any of them. You can really put anything anywhere at this point. Like I said, the number of groups we have is small enough that like we can have a conversation here. I will share my screen now. Thank you, Ben.
You got it.
And there we go. And basically what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to zoom in on this area, and I'll just zoom in on group 1 because I don't feel like counting past 1. And you'll see traditional scholastic sports and group 1, and then to the left of it, you will also see a number of Post-it notes. If you click and hold one of those Post-it notes, you can drag it on over to any of these 4 areas outside of that. You can link it to it really nicely. If you want to get fancy and use arrows, you can use all of those tools on the left. Again, you can also use groups 2, 3, and 4. But what we'd like you doing over the next few minutes, and remember, this is also a conversation, so please don't feel the need to do this silently. How do traditional scholastic sports and the schooling experience intersect at academic core content, at the development of soft skills, potential career, and then also social emotional? If you want to add on to that and create another category, go for it. We just started with these 4 as like our quote unquote core 4 for the day, but there are plenty of other things that you can do. Now, the great thing is you don't have to resize your Post-it notes. You double click on a Post-it note, that text will automatically resize. If you move things around, because I'm looking at it right now and I realize I did not lock those things in place, don't worry about it. The thought processes and the conversation are the most important thing here. Not really worried about what it looks like at the end. So with that, we'll open things up for conversation as y'all are kind of building through or building this out. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this as you're adding content to this Miro board.
And I will add that we do have folks are your mics are on. You're muted right now, but you are welcome to unmute and just talk if you want to answer. And I threw a thought in there that for the social emotional piece, that if you're on the team, you get that connection and that bond. And I've heard so many athletes that recently retired say the one thing they miss most about retiring from their sport was the locker room experience and not the actual playing. But I also think we forget how many students don't fit or make or belong in those teams or are physically able to be a part of those teams, and how many students feel left out as a result of that. So I think there's an up and a down social emotional side for traditional school sports.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you named that, because that's something I actually wanted to call attention to. Please feel free to also name things that you think are like not necessarily the best thing about traditional sports in school. One thing that you'll hear, and we'll talk about quite a bit, and you'll hear out in the general sphere, is there is oftentimes a stigma around video games, tabletop games. You remember the Dungeons and Dragons fear and hysteria. I don't know. I don't want to spoil the newest season of Stranger Things for you. I'm actually still watching it too, but there's negative stigmas around everything. So we should name those, because there are real problems that exist. And then there are also ones that are not necessarily problems. They are problems of perception. And we have to name those and break those apart from one another in order to truly understand exactly what these experiences are doing for, and what are they creating for our learners.
Yeah, I see some of these pieces here, exclusion for levels of physical fitness, not always inclusive. So I think those are great call outs. Along with, that's right, lots of soft skills, non-cognitive skills, pieces that we're prizing in a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. See resilience, failure not being final.
Not always include. Yep, there it is. Not always inclusive. I'm seeing a lot under career. So I'm seeing teamwork, problem solving. So like you also see intersectionality here, right? You see those are things that are valued in career, but those are also soft skills. And we know that soft skills actually play a much bigger role in success in a career than traditional like knowledge-based skills or even academic skills oftentimes. But also feel free to start naming specific career opportunities related to traditional sports as well. So I see communication there. One thing that comes to mind for me is, you know, kids get to do the broadcast. They do the broadcast. Like I was not fortunate enough to go to school when AV was as proliferant as it is now. And you have kids that run full-fledged broadcasts for their sporting events or the morning news on the announcements the next day. And there's tons of skills that they learn there. Y'all are just making my heart happy for participating right now. I appreciate it so much. Physics, momentum, data skills. Yeah, right. Like you learn not to, I'll never, like my gym teacher forever was telling me, you don't actually use the backboard of the basketball in basketball. You want to shoot for the net, that's not what it's there for. I'm like, but there's a square right there that I'm okay, whatever. So I learned lots of informal physics right there. Absolutely. Seeing a comment from Stacy, right? AV, right? In Stranger Things, the AV kids were the nerds. Today, they're the heroes in the schools. Absolutely. There is a link, Karen. Stacy just sent it again. We are on a Miro board. Absolutely. Thank you for asking about that. Got another few minutes on this. Anything else that's sticking out to you, Ben? I mean, we've got a ton of stuff on here.
Seeing, yeah, just calling out exactly what you just talked about in Stacy's comment, just seeing that huge shortage of sound engineers right now. I'm scrolling around.
See, physical therapy, medicine, and training, like how much has gone into athletic training over the years and what a big business that is now.
You know, I've tended to be a little bit guarded sometimes in talking about competition, but I think there is a really healthy element of competition and striving to achieve and succeed that for a lot of people, sports really appeals to them. And then there are lots of facets of work. And think about someone like Daniel Pink talking about drive and motivation 2.0, that autonomy, mastery, and purpose, that people who want to excel or find mastery in what they do can compete within themselves. So you see some of those elements there too. So yeah, I see a lot of that related to the world at work.
For sure. And like, I'm even thinking like medicine and training, like we think of like sports psychologists now and how much of a game is mental versus physical, and pulling in Daniel Pink's work there. I mean, there's a ton of that as well. So there's just, it's really incredible how much of that kind of weaves in and out of the traditional sporting experience in a school. Data analytics, love that. Yeah, absolutely. That was always my favorite way to teach averages, was to have kids go to the ESPN website and pull one of their favorite athletes and have them calculate the statistics for that. And for other kids that weren't interested in that, we looked at other things, and we'll talk a little bit about that more as we move through. And I think we've got just about one more minute. I wanted to ask, I'm really curious about place-based engagement. Somebody posted that, and I'd love to, you can either come off mute or feel free to type it in the chat, whatever way you're most comfortable sharing. I'd love to hear what you mean by that.
Hi, yeah, so that was me. I'll actually come on video too.
Cool.
So when I was writing that, so place-based engagement for these kind of traditional sports, I was thinking more of that experience of, you know, going to a football field and having all the audience in that one spot, whereas, you know, esports are so much more decentralized. And while I think we can, you know, talk about this later about the good and bad of, you know, what that looks like in the future. But I think, yeah, these traditional sports being so place-based, so in time, just there in the moment, you know, either that or being like, you know, live broadcast across the nation, those kinds of dynamics that play into how we treat the sports.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm not going to cut anybody off. If you want to keep adding things to this Miro for traditional sports, please do, because I find it super valuable. I know Ben and I are probably going to spend hours debriefing on this, but You can also keep that Miro board open. We will return to it. Spoiler alert, if you saw to the right, we are also going to do this for esports in just a bit, but we wanted to get you thinking about school now and start talking through what the transition to esports and education looks like and what that can look like in the future. So I'm going to turn things over to Ben. I know he's going to share his screen in a moment and share some pretty amazing content with you over the next few minutes.
That's right. And thanks, Nick. I'm just going to do one more flyby through here. I'm seeing a few more just to call it. Yeah, just even that academics and tied to like physiology, exercise, biology, how the body works, sports psychology. There's some really interesting pieces there too. Yeah, let me navigate my way and you will feel free, please. I'm going to share my screen, but if you have you prefer to privilege your screen and continue in the Miro board or want to noodle around there, please feel free. I'll get my slideshow back up and I'll get my Zoom share back up. So now that we've kind of done some work mapping this traditional sports context inside of education, want to then kind of now introduce esports at a glance. There's probably, we are starting to see emerging scholarship and volumes and volumes and volumes of bodies of work around esports and what it is, which is like a fascinating dive into the academic literature that's emerged. Or we could just turn on Twitch and watch that for hours. Well, I'm going to try to fly through here in just a couple of minutes, a little bit of just an overview of esports. If you are either unfamiliar or just kind of new into the space, I will share that myself, a career educator, and have really only been in this space about 6 months, particularly at eFuse, and I'm learning a lot, particularly around the collegiate space. But just to offer a couple of perspectives, I mean, I think a very short, punchy, obvious definition. I think esports kind of is on its face what it appears to be, would be my perception. Nick, I'd love to, or anyone else in the room who has thoughts to kind of push back against that, but essentially just structured and organized competition in video games or in games against human controlled opponents. So live competition is kind of one of the defining elements. But one of the other kind of big areas of definition has really been around this kind of socio-cultural phenomenon that's rooted not just in sports, but in media and entertainment and culture. And it's really driven through this digitized environment. And really we started to see that we're kind of interdisciplinary by nature, blurring boundaries across fields, media, journalism, all other sorts of industries that get associated and imbued through this, really driven through kind of a digital culture. There is a kind of a very interesting ecosystem, especially in the educational space, that is worth kind of recognizing here, that as opposed to kind of traditional school sports, and I did not see this called out in our diagram, but the organizing structure and the ecosystem for traditional sports, particularly in scholastic, K-12 and collegiate spaces, really you have kind of large governing bodies and federations to which the schools or institutions are members that then kind of set rules and drive and really do a lot of organizing. Esports is a lot more kind of confederated or distributed, where games, you know, no one owns basketball. Spalding might make a basketball, but Epic Games creates Fortnite. They own Fortnite. So developers and publishers really kind of lead the way across the industry. They create games. Those games are played on a platform, a PC, a PlayStation, an Xbox, a Nintendo Switch, mobile games. And those are usually played by, you know, sports teams, tournaments. You're starting to see professional, you're not starting to see, you have established professional teams. Institutions of higher ed, K-12 schools are organizing, even local community clubs are organizing. And then generally how that is consumed or distributed, digital streaming platforms, Twitch, YouTube gaming, Facebook gaming, and really then consumed by streamers or viewers, and then social media, kind of lots of interaction. So this ecosystem really in a way kind of driven by publishers and gamers, although there's lots of other actors in the space. So academic institutions, private sector actors. There are lots of organizing and governing federations, but some of them are organized by teacher groups. Some of them are nonprofit organizations. There's for-profit companies. And then there are organizations of parent affiliated organizations who are really supporting education in the space around esports and around competition. So a really interesting ecosystem that's built out a little bit differently. And just some big numbers to throw at you. Projected global revenue from a Newzoo report in late April, $1.38 billion is a kind of a global esports industry. About 260 million people around the world kind of watch esports or consume esports on a monthly basis. And there are over 2,000 institutions of higher ed in the United States that have a formally organized esports program or club, some of it varsity, some student organized on the club level. So it's has a really large presence in the US higher education ecosystem. And one way that we want to start to think about introducing this inside of education is really thinking about the development of esports as a curriculum at institutions of higher education in particular as really driving or being responsive to the drive for careers in this industry. Nick, do you want to share a little bit about this graphic?
Absolutely. So there is actually a much more advanced graphic version of this that we will share on the Miro for you as well. But this one, to Ben's point, really distills incredibly nicely some of the different ways in which esports is truly an interdisciplinary thing that can exist in school and leading out of school. Very similar to what we would say about traditional sports, but also in many ways very different as well. So you see on the right-hand side, you've got content creators. So you're seeing folks like shoutcasters who would be like your color commentary or your analytics folk who are on a traditional sports programming. Streamers themselves, and even within that, we've got folks who play competitively and stream that content, but then there are also ones who stream content that's more entertainment focused without the competitive nature to it. And then you see journalists in and around the sport. You see organizations like the Washington Post have an entire section of particularly their digital, but also at times their print newspaper called Launcher that's focused directly on the video game industry and all of this emerging technologies and outputs that come from that industry. And then you've got organizers. So you have folks who, as Ben was saying before, folks who organize events and tournaments. You have general managers, coaches, IT support, making sure all of the technology is working correctly. You know, there are in-person, we call LAN events, local area network events, where they come together and they're actually playing the game in the same physical space. And then particularly during the pandemic, but even prior to that, huge online competition. So if you ever hear kids talking about playing ranked versus pubs, there's a ton of infrastructure that goes into making sure those ranked matches go off without a hitch, and that your public access to servers that are supposed to be more generally fun-based are working and working. You'll never hear a kid angrier than, or as a dad, you'll never hear a dad angrier than when he goes to finally log in to play at night and there's downtime on the server. So all of that work that goes into that, making sure those things are happening. And then strategists. So coaches kind of overlap between organizers and strategists. You've got theory crafters, you have analysts who are doing a lot of the work of watching tape, watching film, tape and film, watching VODs, as we call it, video on demand, watching those recordings of streams or recordings from the in-game. And again, there's overlap there with content creators. They then in turn inform what journalists can contribute and write about. And then last but certainly not least are entrepreneurs. You've got web developers, folks who need to set up and stand up all of that foundation, who then also hire that IT support, marketing that goes behind this. Again, a billion-dollar industry we're talking about, gaming writ large, and even esports. Corporate sponsorship, organizations looking to support these endeavors, but also get their own brand out there. And then business developers, people looking for that next big idea that they can launch, invest in, and help scale.
Yeah, and this is it is really fascinating. As in my short time in esports and in this industry, I've worked with several teams that they were grassroots, student organized collegiate leagues who built partnerships with publishers and now own and operate these leagues that create other opportunities for college students to play in. And all of these roles that are in here outside of developing the software themselves, these as students folks were organizing and standing up and creating these roles and now are transitioning into careers. So this is, as we start now into kind of the next piece to think about an education system on Mars and problematizing this in some ways, these pieces are already here. They're already happening. And there are lots and lots of college students who are driving this themselves in particular. And those opportunities are extending down to the K-12 level as well. Nick, I really appreciate kind of that overview. And I want to add one more kind of bit of foil here, just to give us something really to kind of noodle on as we go into the last set of mapping for esports, which is this concept of the grammar of schooling, which came out of Tyack and Tobin in 94, or Tyack and Larry Cuban in 1995, kind of had this concept for how we kind of speak, the implicit ways we speak about school and understand school. It really describes like the invisible architecture that organizes much of what happens in education. So you can think about, give you a couple of examples here. So you can think about the idea of age-based classrooms, grades themselves, leveling, tracking, sorting students by perceived availability, but then all of these lots of other kind of implicit pieces, knowledge that's been divided up into disciplinary subjects, the organizing of a school day around a bell schedule or periods, or a lecture hall, or any traditional setup of, hey, there's a teacher transmitting knowledge in the front of a room and students who are kind of receiving this. And there's lots and lots of concepts that probably are adjacent to this or attached to this. And in some ways, I don't present the images here or this kind of version of schooling as a straw man. There's lots and lots of innovation that's happened since the beginning of formalized schooling, and certainly in the history of, you know, our context in the United States, let's say, although we're going to think about this in a global or even intergalactic fashion. One of the real interesting pieces for the grammar of schooling, or why we want to introduce this concept, is that it really has a stickiness. So David Lavery, an education historian, wrote last year, like the grammar of language, the grammar of schooling operates at such a deep level that its rules become invisible, just part of the way things are. If a person uses bad grammar in speech, it just doesn't sound right. And when a school violates the grammar of schooling, it doesn't feel like a real school. And so one of the impulses that I know you're being challenged to through this whole Shaping EDU experience, but I think one of the things Nick and I want to problematize with you here, this concept of the grammar of schooling, is you start to, hey, let's get out of the box. We want to innovate. You find out that you're not just in one box with the grammar of schooling, you're in a series of kind of nested doll kind of containers that if you change one thing, now you've kind of problematized all of these other things. And school has been very sticky, or one of the kind of hypotheses of Tyack and Cuban is one of the things that has made school very hard to change is this very commonly held kind of implicit grammar of schooling that we all speak. And so just want to put this here in front of you as a way to think about, hey, let's go problematize this. Let's go push against this, and let's think about some of the ways that we might reimagine school. And so we'll throw this in the Miro board, but John Maida and Sarah Fine wrote a really, really great book a few years ago called In Search of Deeper Learning. They took tours of high schools all across the United States and really started to think about schools that challenge this grammar of schooling. And you can see kind of this existing grammar of schooling and a new grammar of schooling. Again, we'll share the graphic or link to the graphic in the Miro. But you think about the purpose, the pedagogical goals, the ethos, how we view knowledge, how space and time are arranged. There really are different pieces that we could tug on or pull on or start to think about. And so as we go into kind of revisiting the same activity of mapping kind of these elements of traditional sports, now we're going to think about esports. We want to use this whole session as a tool that you can take to the larger work of this week to really think about kind of reimagining and redesigning kind of a utopian education system on Mars, or even how we might work toward it here on planet Earth. Is, hey, what's kind of the role of esports in an education system for the future? Thinking about those elements we just thought about, and thinking about this idea of the grammar of schooling, of where can we tug on that? How might we repurpose that? Where can we kind of start to stretch our conception of what a real school looks like, thinking about some of those elements? So Nick, I'll throw it back over to you. I'll let you share this, and then I'll stop sharing for a minute and get back to the Miro board.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. And Stacy, if you could drop that link back in the chat again for folks in case they left the Miro board. Oh man, my title disappeared. That's okay. Things got dragged around. Oh, there it is. I'll bring it back. No problem there. I don't even need my organizer over it. I am going to share my screen again. That is the phrase of the 2020s. Here we go. So you can just kind of nudge over to the right and you'll see more sticky notes. And again, you'll see a different image, same categories. Also, again, feel free to not use the ones that we have there. Feel free to draw connections between them. And again, we also encourage you to think through this not only from a, wow, this is a really great way to do things, but also poke holes in this, challenge things. As we talk about the grammar of schooling, we know that there are things that are in place that can cause problems, both in school and in broader society. We know how often gaming is an argument against, there's an argument against gaming for so many reasons. And we know that the research says that it is not problematic in the way that folks say that it is, but we still want to name those things because that is something that we have to contend with. And as an in-between between Earth 2022 and Mars in the future, those are things, while we can design without those restrictions in place, we do want to name them in this work because that's where we can say, we're going to make sure that doesn't exist when we move to a future that looks like that. So again, this is an open conversation. We're going to stop at about 20 of the hour on this so that we have some time for Q&A and for any other follow-up that folks might want to talk through. But I'll leave this up so you can kind of get my perspective on how things look and what I'm taking a look at right now. So again, feel free to pop any notes on any of them. Let me scroll out a little bit. I think I see some folks working on some other ones as well. Digital balance, absolutely, it's a big thing. You know, for a long time we've talked about screen time as one thing. You're either on a screen or you're not. I'm a big fan of talking about your digital diet. You've seen Common Sense Media and the American Academy of Pediatrics talk a lot more about your digital diet more than screen time in more recent history. You need to eat. And in the 21st century, you also need to spend time on screens. But there are different uses for those screens. There is fun time. There is work time. In some cases, in the case of Scholastic Esports, it can be both. And we want to make sure that we're aware of those things, but also name that you can physically overexert yourself in football. You can hurt yourself. You know, soccer is the #1 concussion cause for youths under 18. That's a big, first of all, for not being a sport where you wear helmets, like that makes a lot of sense. But also physical sports have their own drawbacks as well, despite many of the benefits that go along with them as well. Connect around the world beyond borders, even like being able to play from state to state, being able to play across the country. There are factors that limit that as well. If anybody knows anything about basic networking, the farther you are from a server, the more latency you deal with, the more lag you have, the greater your ping is. You trying to drop some vocabulary that you might hear some kids and coaches say.
That's right.
It's a problem that technology is a limiting factor of the technology, which is why LAN events, those local area network events where kids or adults come together to play, are so big. A, for the camaraderie in person, but B, also because it can also be a limiting factor competitively. Ben, what are you seeing on here?
Just zooming in, throwing a few links in. I think there's some really, I see a couple of interesting questions here. I mean, one, as we think about some of the pieces that will be different and what changes. Actually, I think there's a larger question of, hey, what changes? But I see, will you lose skill at reading body language and nonverbal communication? I think it's one of those pieces that, yes, what are the other things that change? What are the other things that become problematized? I think it's not framed as a question, but down when we see kind of safe spaces for non-sports people, kind of who you are versus how you look. I think about the idea of gamer tags, right? The name that you play with and the identity that you have, and folks who may only know each other or build a friendship through gamer tags. and yet know so much about one another. Some of those things have jumped out at me here.
Yeah, I think a lot in particular around this is an area, this is a space where kids who may not enjoy traditional sports for whatever reason it may be, whether it's the physical proximity, they don't like the games that are being played, socially it's hard. You know, my son, we signed him up for soccer, he hated it, absolutely hated it. He'll play in the backyard a little bit, but he will play Mario Kart with you for hours. He likes the competitive nature. He likes talking about the game. He likes games where we get to work together and do things together. I'm wearing my Ninja Turtles shirt today because the new Ninja Turtles game came out and we've been crushing that. And it's an experience that for my neurodiverse 5-year-old allows him to connect with folks in a way that playing a sport in person is really difficult for him and requires a number of scaffolds. I want him to grow in comfort with that, but I also want there to be spaces where he can actually engage in a way that is totally comfortable to him as a default. So this is, I love this one. Are you penalized for slower processing and decision making? So again, I will use traditional sports as kind of as something that's somewhat analogous, but we'll all dive into it a little bit more. So you have in your traditional scholastic sports, you've got club sports or intramurals, junior varsity and varsity. You can do the same thing with esports in a school. You can have club or intramural where it's more of just like a gaming club with some casual competition, and then move up into junior varsity and varsity. One of the really cool things, and not everybody thinks it's cool, but there is something that's really incredible called skills-based matchmaking, where you can actually, the better you are, it moves you up in the rankings and you play against other people who are at around that same level. So you are constantly playing, you know, oh man, I'm going to go back to undergrad. Zone of proximal development. There it is. Like, yeah. So like while you're playing games, you can very much operate in your zone of proximal development. If it's your first time playing Fortnite, you're going to be playing mostly against actual bots, artificial intelligence in the game, bringing you up to speed, helping you learn the mechanics. As you get better, whether you're playing in ranked or even in public open matches, it knows how well you play and it adjusts the lobbies, the servers that you're playing on to help make sure that you're playing at a place where it's challenging enough to keep you engaged, but not so much that you're playing against a professional gamer for the most part.
Yeah. And I would call out, I don't see these offered explicitly as critiques, but I think what's really important, I would suggest is important for you all as you think about kind of the design and where you take things over the next 2 days is, I see a couple of comments here, potential for cyberbullying and verbal abuse. As in my experience in the last 6 months in this collegiate space, there is a really strong sensitivity and lots of folks kind of active in the collegiate space of esports in particular for not tolerating cyberbullying, abuse, sexual harassment, and yet knowing that has existed everywhere, but particularly in digital spaces and across gaming spaces, that reconciling some of that history has been called out quite a bit. And then the other one I think is really worth
Ben, before you go into the other one, can I add something on that one as well? So the other thing I want to name there, and why we're talking about this as future building, there's a reason why it's called locker room talk. That locker room is oftentimes the locker room we're talking about is the locker room of traditional sports in schools, in K-12, in higher ed. So these are things that don't exist in the vacuum of gaming. These are things that are pervasive in any environment in which folks come together. And we do want to name that. Are there other additional problems that come with it being online? Absolutely. There's an anonymity. There's lots of different things that can come into play. But I also always like to say, like, there are many folks who will advocate against this, who would throw everything out because of that. Whereas what we know is that those things exist right now in traditional sports, from parents yelling on the sidelines at their kindergartner's t-ball game all the way up through the professional leagues. So these are things that I always like to say, like, make sure that we name them. We want to design against them. I always say, let's look at every mistake the NCAA has made over the years in rolling out amateur collegiate athletics, and let's do the things differently for esports and improve them where we can, and not make those same mistakes, and design with equity and safety in mind now, so that we don't have to go back and fix it. Ben, you're on mute.
Of course, I made that comment earlier, and then I fell victim to it, because that is how the universe works, which is awesome. Just the last comment I'll make here, which is another note I see that I think is really, really important to acknowledge, is, hey, someone requires a strong connection and good computer setup with some dollar signs. And that's absolutely true. Right now, the technology, not just the devices themselves, but the access to the infrastructure, the internet, those pieces are still, in some ways, complicating factors. There's lots of folks in the space trying to equitize that, but in the same way that good equipment on the sports field matters, obviously your setup, your infrastructure is really, really important. And
George just said that in the chat too.
Yeah,
I live in the Mid-Atlantic. I played lacrosse.
Yeah,
there are games that are cost prohibitive, whether they are traditional sports or esports. Absolutely.
That's right. And then the one other piece to your point, Nick, is because this is largely not an NCAA regulated piece, even with the introduction of NIL legislation in the past year, there are prize pools for college students winning tournaments. So we've operated a couple of leagues in the last few months that had $25,000, $30,000 prize pools for a winning team, that they took in half of that for college students. Really, really great opportunities, and then prize pools that scale down for teams. So there is opportunity in this space for earning through championship play.
And quick plug for Stacy's for the next section, the next block. There is a universal broadband session. So if you're interested in that, and particularly the challenges around connectivity for kids and how that could relate to esports, that sounds like a really nice pairing. Nice charcuterie board of esports and broadband, if you will, with a nice red.
That's right.
We've got we've just got a few minutes left.
Yeah.
I know, Ben, if you had anything for wrap up, and then any additional questions folks might have.
Yeah, I think we really appreciate your time, just down to probably about 90 seconds left. And so for me, I think just a couple of questions we'd have you consider as you move toward redesigning today and tomorrow. Just, from a social equity perspective, what we've been talking about, how will the proliferation of our digital lives shape and be shaped by an esports ecosystem? And then, what are the new opportunities that will emerge through esports, and how might those opportunities challenge or even reify some of our existing grammar of schooling? So it's just some things there. And if there are any other takeaways with about the last minute we have, we'd love to just kind of leave it open. I'll preemptively say kind of thanks for Nick and I, but I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And if we just have another minute or so for comments or dialogue, we'd love to hear it. And
I'm going to drop my social in the chat again, Ben, if you want to drop yours as well, if folks want to connect us and continue the conversation. It's a great question about, is there a curriculum for high school for esports? Ben, this sounds like something that you might want to speak a bit about.
Yeah, well, so that is emerging. I have been tasked with working at that somewhat, although there are some other folks kind of in the sector. I believe that Exposure is a company out of Dallas, Texas, that is building out some pieces there. And I'm pretty sure NACE, which is the National Association of Collegiate Esports, has been building out some of those pieces. So, but that is emerging. There are lots of folks who want to work in that. In fact, at ASU, just had a conversation last week with some folks who are interested in building that out as well. So there's a lot of exciting stuff kind of developing. And I think those are the pieces of the industry that are likely to start to catch up, particularly in the education space. NASEF, that's a great one.
NASEF has done some great work. And then there are a lot of, I would say there are also a lot of complementary, like I think one thing we can talk a lot about is there's a lot of career and technical curriculum that can be used. I don't want to say shoehorned, but can certainly apply. So if you're talking about kids doing the broadcasting or the shoutcasting end of esports, there's curriculum and content that already exists about how to set up a broadcast and how to do that and what public speaking is like. So I think there's definitely curriculum development to be done and publication to be done, but there are also so many things that you can start from. But I want to make sure that we are at time. So I want to thank you again for your time and energy today. Thank you all for participating so intently with the Miro board and the conversation. We really are appreciative of all of you. Thanks so much. And Ben,
Yes.
thanks for letting me hop onto this with you.
Oh no, cheers. Appreciate you all. And Nick, thanks so much. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.